Real problem.
Oh, yeah. There are more.
No one wants the front row.
This is our laptop. This is there are plenty of seats in the front. Okay. Should we start to do this? Okay. Let me make sure. You are screen sharing. Okay. I think we're recording. Should we just do it? Okay. Whoa. Hello. Hello. How's that? Does that sound good? Hello? Is that better? Yeah? Oh, okay. While Jill is turning this up, really, if you can give a round of applause to Jill Sawyer, who has been a supporter and who has given us space for the evening. Thank you so much, Jill. How is that? Is that better? Is that better? Okay, okay. Really great to see you all tonight and to have you turn out for what I think is a really important and timely talk. Let's go back to the beginning here. Okay, right? Go back to the beginning. Okay. I'm going to do a really quick introduction of Nancy Bercaw, who is coming to us from Washington, D.C., where her workplace, the Smithsonian, is closed down right now. So we're really lucky that she has decided she would come up here. Nancy's a 1982 graduate of Oberlin College, and today she handed Gary and me a copy of the notebook and handouts she has from her 1981 class that the Introduction to American History that the two of us taught. So thank you so much. We take no responsibility, but only great pride in what she does now. So, Nancy, as many of you know, has worked on the National African American Museum. She has been a curator of political history. She comes to us right now, having recently been at the Emmett Till site, Interpretive Center in Mississippi, and I'm not going to go on. She has a resume like this, and she has promised that she will introduce herself some more. So, Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time. She's here, sponsored by us, by Oberlin College, by the African American Genealogy and History Group, and by the Oberlin Heritage Center. Thank everybody who's bringing you here, and thank you for coming. It's really wonderful to have you here.
Thank you all, and thanks so much for everyone who did all the work to bring this together. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I'm going to be reading, and I want you to forgive me for that. I won't, can you guys hear me? Am I speaking into the mic well enough? Louder? Okay, thanks. So, good evening. I'm so excited to be with you tonight and to finally meet you in person. because I've had the greatest pleasure spending the last 2 weeks since I've been furloughed, combing through your website, watching your videos, and learning from archaeologists and woodworkers. But what really excited me the most was the way you've been careful to record all of the labor across generations that made the Wilson Bruce Evans House possible. From your newsletters, I gained insight into the hard work created by local Black history keepers when others turned a blind eye to the forceful and heart-filled histories of Oberlin's Black communities. So I'm really thrilled to meet you all. So from the newsletters, I'm aware of the work of Dorothy Inborden Miller, who held on to the Evans House across generations and cultivated a love of Oberlin's rich Black history to her nieces and nephews. To Phyllis Yarber Hogan and Linda Robinson Isabel for creating the African American Genealogy and History Group. I get that right from the newsletters? And the histories meticulously researched and written by Marlene Merrill and brought to life by the performances of Camille Hamlin Allen. So much was created from the drive and passion of so many, without any backing from institutions, foundations, or the historical profession. And all of this made the flowering of the Wilson Bruce Evans House possible. So I come to you really quite humbled and frankly awestruck by what you've accomplished. It's really astounding. I've been asked to speak to you today on this topic that's fairly weighty about the prospects for African American public history and museums today. Yet even as I stand here, I fully realize that I'm in the presence of those who are wiser and more knowledgeable than myself, the true experts in this field. So while I have learned about you, I thought you should know a little bit about me before I begin, just so you can figure out how I can be of service to you. So I'm a curator and a historian at the Smithsonian, this large institution. It calls itself the world's largest research institution. And I'm not an administrator or a director, but I'm a practitioner, a storyteller, just like you. So as a curator, I've been able to travel the country and listen deeply to expert knowledges gathered by families, institutions, and individuals, and with them to bring their stories to a national audience through exhibitions, digital sites, and teaching materials. So at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, I had the great honor to co-curate Slavery and Freedom with Mary Elliott and Sion Wold-Michael. And I was brought on as the resident egghead. So I was a former professor. So I was the one that was supposed to know all that kind of stuff. But the beauty of the work is that it really expanded the way I understand history and what history really is. And that was from collecting all the objects that went into that exhibit. And we started with 0. And in the process of collecting, I really, my understanding of history was transformed. So each time we collected an object from a family, we collected the stories that went with it. The stories that were embedded with the values that the family held tight and kept safe from a dismissing gaze of white culture. So pictured here, for instance, is the community of Edisto Island, South Carolina, and they're standing by the slave dwelling that we collected in 2015. So when we went down to collect that cabin, it felt really wrong to take an object that was so precious to the community away from the community. So Mary, Sion, and I decided that we really needed to reach out to the genealogists and the local historians to make sure that we could really reach out and try to find the people who had lived in the cabin or lived close by. And the result was that when we dismantled the cabin, and it took a week, slowly moving board by board, everyone began to share their stories. And there was something about telling the stories about something that was just an object, just a cabin, where stories began to pour forth. And at the end of that week, a member of the Latine work crew said to me, he said, "The multitudes are with us today." And that is so true, that the ancestors are really embedded in the cabin. And I was really relieved that when the cabin was moved to Washington, D.C., I could still feel them within it. So that work changed me as a person and as a historian. And I carried that work over to the National Museum of American History, which is a predominantly white museum, to see if I could change the practices there and to see if it could be more responsible to the public that it serves. There I worked with Black communities in the Mississippi Delta. I was just down there last week. Formerly incarcerated scholars from the Goucher Prison Education Partnership Program. We have a year-long internship, and really I've learned so much from those students. And also undocumented immigrants. And from each, I took heart at the way that they pursued their knowledge in hostile, to put it mildly, environments. So I have to acknowledge right from the outset that this work is under attack. The grim truth is that most of my projects at the Smithsonian have been dismantled since last January. When I go to work these days, I laugh that my job has been reduced to sitting in my office. I still do work, but instead of creating, I'm saving. I'm archiving, downloading, preserving, so that the work can be picked back up again in the future. Am I surprised that this is happening? Not really, because we all know that history is and always will be a battleground. And perhaps no object speaks better to this than this object right here, the Emmett Till marker. This marker was paid for and erected not by the state of Mississippi, not by the US government, but by the community of Tallahatchie County, Mississippi. It rests at the site where young Emmett's body was drawn from the river. And as you can see here, it's continually defaced and shot at to this day. Each time the marker was shot, the community of Tallahatchie County, Mississippi pieced together the funds and they put up a new marker. And finally, in 2019, they erected a bulletproof marker. This violent erasure of history is now organized on a national scale, waged by no other than the US government itself. Teachers and professors are under attack. My fellow curators, especially Black women, are under attack. 1/3 of all the nation's museums have lost federal funding, 1/3. And 44 states have restricted teaching of Black history and critical race theory in schools. But in the face of this, I want to shout out that I have no fear. I have no fear at all that Black history will be silenced or erased. Because we've been here before, and that up until the last 50 years, Black history was always written, passed down, and cemented in museums, archives, and libraries by Black communities themselves. Now I have to have a little drink of water. Do you all recognize these folks? In fact, Black history has always been a part of the Black activist playbook. Ancestors since Absalom Jones' Thanksgiving sermon in 1808, where's Absalom Jones? Explicated, studied, researched, and wrote Black history, and recognized that history is critical in the fight for human rights. Others followed Reverend Jones, putting Black history into print. Facing such an urgent political agenda, just imagine the country before the Civil War. People were facing and fighting for the abolition of slavery, Black women's suffrage, and the end to legalized discrimination. So why did Black activists focus on history? If you look at those 19th century pamphlets, history is usually in the first or second paragraph. They realized, as we realize, that history is a tool for justice. and the assertion of humanity in a culture that seeks to dehumanize people in order to exploit them. But history also works internally as well, providing a space for healing and empowerment. This makes me think back to Susie King Taylor. Just imagine her now as a young girl. Susie King Taylor broke the law every day, at great risk to herself and her family, to attend school in Savannah, Georgia, as an enslaved Black child. Each morning, she carefully wrapped up all of her books and newspaper to disguise the fact that she was going to school. She and the woman who taught her faced down the forces of white supremacy to imagine a better future. These histories, taught behind closed doors, carved Black understandings of our past in ways that continue to challenge mainstream historians, breaking free from a whitewashed understanding of who we are as a nation. These histories are a more honest and accurate understanding of our shared past and could only be created in spaces that Tourmaline, the queer Black trans activist, describes as the importance of us remembering us. In other words, a whole and complete truth, not obliged or even engaged with the boxes and categories assigned by white culture, academic disciplines, universities, or national funding organizations. So institutions, this is supposed to be my ring of hope. So institutions, even with the funding they bring, are not everything. They come with strings attached and are often dismissive of local knowledges. Breaking free from them, even at the expense of future funding, is not always a bad thing. In fact, I've worked closely with many community archivists who have respectfully declined to work with me at the Smithsonian for this very reason. Some of them are pictured here. Institutions, with their dense bureaucratic structures built on the organizing pillars of white supremacy, stamp, confine, and flatten the love and care that went into crafting these really rich histories. They just get condensed. So back in 1915, Carter G. Woodson recognized this fact. Carter G. Woodson stepped outside of institutional control, white universities and also HBCUs. So he decided that he was going to create his own organizations to create an unfiltered Black history. He created a publishing arm, so he wouldn't have to rely on other presses. He created the Journal of Negro History. He created a separate scholarly organization so people could get together and brainstorm. And that's today's Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And he also created an educational platform, and that was the first Negro History Week, which is now Black History Month. So in the first half of the 20th century, he and countless others laid the foundation for the history that is written and remembered to this day. Writing histories, producing plays, creating art, assembling archives, they laid the foundation for Black liberation. Because of individuals like Carter G. Woodson, Black memory work is not as vulnerable today as it was in the past. In the past 10 years, brick and mortar institutions have been created that will be hard to dismantle. They can't destroy the Equal Justice Initiative, which was carefully built without a dime from federal or state institutions, or Michelle Browder's Mothers of Gynecology Monument in Montgomery, Alabama, or the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And they can't destroy the Wilson Bruce Evans House and its place for telling a truthful history, painstakingly and lovingly curated across generations. So I have no fear that this work will continue regardless of resources. For inspiration at this time, because I think we need some, I turn towards people and places I know best, the Black culture workers in Mississippi and Louisiana, because that's where most of my work really lies. For operating on a shoestring, I think of the Mound Bayou Museum of African American History and Culture, created just 3 years ago by Herman and Darrell Johnson. Mound Bayou was an all-Black town founded in 1887 in the Mississippi Delta by men and women who had been enslaved. By the turn of the century, the town was flourishing. It had 2 cotton gins, it had several cotton mill presses, it had a hospital, a radio station, and a newspaper. So Mound Bayou was really a safe haven in Mississippi. People from Booker T. Washington to Medgar Evers to Mamie Till Mobley, and also the Black press, would find sanctuary there. It was a safe place. So needless to say, Mound Bayou's strength and independence made it a target. And to this very day, Mound Bayou is cut off from state funding at just about every level. So when the Johnson brothers decided to turn an old school into a museum, they did it themselves. They didn't worry about going out and getting expensive museum cases that would pass the AAM standards. They didn't worry about having like proper security and humidity control. They went up to Memphis, they bought store display cases, and they put in the artifacts. And when you walk in there today, you can see the breadth of the town's history. And it's richly displayed from photographs from all the members of that community. So I take heart from them. In a similar vein, one of my favorite museums is the River Road Museum in Donaldsonville, Louisiana. When I visited it in 2015, the museum was in an old Rosenwald school. When you walked in the door, it felt like home. The walls were painted warm colors, and copies of old newspapers lined the walls, telling the history of this town and life on the River Road. And the director, Kathy Hambrick's office, was just off the main room, and the door was wide open, and it was filled with comfy places to sit and visit. But I tell you, the biggest joy about being there was that I was there with school let out, just by happenstance. And it seemed like half the elementary school showed up at the museum, just to have some fun in the garden, or join a Girl Scout troop, or just hang out. You name it, it was happening at that museum. It was just a town center. And my final shout out is to Gloria Dickerson for seeing history as a bedrock for activating structural change. Ms. Dickerson is the CEO of We Together Creating Change in Drew, Mississippi, where she grew up. When Gloria returned home to Mississippi after a successful career, she found that people were no better off than she was when she was growing up hungry as a sharecropper's daughter in the 1960s. And this hit Gloria really hard because she and her 6 brothers and sisters were the first to integrate the local schools to secure a better life. In retaliation, they were beaten at school, their family was kicked off the land, and they were terrorized at night with bullets whizzing over their heads. So 40 years later, she and her siblings were successful. They all went on to get more education and have really successful careers. But when she came back home to Drew, she saw that nothing had changed in Drew, that people were still living the same way. So Ms. Dickerson rethought how to make change. She began with an after-school program focused on history. She created the Emmett Till Academy to empower children with the knowledge that their ancestors, like them, were not victims, but change agents, and that their circumstances were not rooted in themselves, but in injustice. Then she raised funds for a playground, worked to create a memorial for Fannie Lou Hamer, and more recently, this is really amazing, last time I was down there, they live in a food desert, and if you live in a rural area and there's a food desert, you're traveling a good 70 miles to get your groceries. So what Gloria did was she one time told me, never ask how, just do it. What she did was she just organized to have all of the groceries shipped. You know how you can use like Uber Eats and that kind of stuff? Well, they just did that, and now you go down there and there's a huge warehouse full of fresh produce. So for Ms. Gloria, history is the impetus. She always says this, history is the impetus and the fire that fills people with agency and the desire to act. So in these places, we see people making change by, like the Johnson brothers making a way out of no way, or like the River Road Museum, keeping focused on who they really work for, all of those kids pouring out of school each day. And with Gloria, using history as an agent to really create structural change. So in the absence of government support, who do we turn to? And this is an open question. I don't have all the answers. There are independent funding agencies like the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, which was recently awarded $40 million from Mackenzie Scott, so keep an eye on that one. And for ideas, camaraderie, and support, there's the Association for African American Museums, which also distributes small grants. But when I was just down in Mississippi, I met more people just this last trip. And you find supporters in really unexpected places, like the Conservation Fund. So if you think of the Conservation Fund, I usually think of wildlife. You know, that well, it turns out that the Conservation Fund is also working on legacy sites. And the legacy sites are civil rights and also abolitionist networks. So they deal in real estate, but they also work in community to help people make dreams become a reality. So pictured here is Philip Howard in Selma, Alabama. And I just found out that Oberlin has a Selma, Alabama connection. But I could talk about that a little bit more later. Anyway, Mr. Howard is the sweetest, smartest, and most heartful person around. And he works with civil rights and these abolitionist sites. So he's a great person to get to know. And last week in Mississippi, I also became aware of something that you all may already know something about. But there's a network of people who call themselves citizen architects. And they're committed to putting their talents to use by communities. But what really amazed me when I was talking to them is that they really help you soup to nuts. So they don't just build and restore, but they work with communities to find out and identify exactly what your goal and purpose is. But then they help with writing grants, but they also have this huge database where they just identify funding. So anytime they hear about funding, they just plug it into that database. And so their motto is, there's always a way. So they've worked with all of those different people that I've showed you in Mississippi and made a lot of those dreams become a reality. But finally, I want to leave you with a story. I had the great pleasure of traveling to Senegal in 2013 as part of the Slavery and Freedom Curatorial team. And there I got to meet Ibrahima Chow from the IFAN Museum. That's the International Museum of North Africa. And with Ibrahima, we were looking at fanner baskets, and we were looking at pottery and ironwork, all made in 16th century Senegal, and marveling at how those objects were just the same as the ones that you find in South Carolina and Georgia, and where they were built by enslaved master craftsmen. And I was talking to Dr. Chow about how in the Americas, master blacksmiths were often the political leaders on plantations. And his eyes just got really big. And he said, you know, Nancy, in Senegal, blacksmiths, potters, and griots, or historians, were feared and still are feared today for their awesome power. What they produced was seen as frightening, beautiful, and touched with this unspeakable power. That power was the power to create something out of nothing, to call an entire world into being. And I think that's a really good reminder for us, that history has the power to call a world into being, to create something that never existed before. It holds a future outside our wildest imaginings. And that work, my friends, is what you're doing here in Oberlin, Ohio. And I wish you Godspeed, and I'm here by your side if you need any support.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, I'm open for questions.
I can start it off by
Yeah.
saying, Nancy, one of the ways we rediscovered you was your work in the founding of the Center for Restorative
Yeah.
History. Can you talk a little bit about what restorative history is?
Yeah, so with Sion Wold-Michael, we created at the National Museum of American History a Center for Restorative History. And what restorative history is all about is really kind of recreating the way museum work is done. It's creating a new paradigm for museum work. So as you all know, museums are often just taking objects, taking stories, digesting them, putting them out there, and then you never see hide nor hair at that museum ever again. And we were really aware that, first of all, that's not a proper practice, but also the fact that there are so many stories that have been silenced and erased over time. And so we got together with a lot of different people around the museum. It was predominantly all people of color in the museum. And it was everyone from our internship coordinator who arranged for the Goucher Prison Education Partnership Program, educators, conservators, funders, everyone. And we just put our heads together and thought, how can we really reframe a more ethical practice, but also to redress all of those past wrongs that are perpetuated today, not just in the past. And so what we kind of began really circling around is the principles and practices of restorative justice. So restorative justice, the way that we work with communities is, first of all, ask if anyone wants to work with us. And you could see that some people were like, no, thank you. But we really work to ask people, we work with historically harmed communities, and we ask people, how have you been harmed? So too often museums and professors and people will just go in and say, I know how you've been harmed. Let me tell you how you can make it better. So instead we ask, how have you been harmed? What are your needs? And then as an institution, we have to be really honest about how we can meet that need. And to tell you the truth, we're a small team, so we have to be really open about that. But then our work also carries across lots of different histories. Lots of different people in America have been historically harmed. So we worked with undocumented immigrants. We work on a Nation of Sanctuary project that's with asylee and refugee communities. The Mississippi Project was a part of this. And what we really do is something that restorative justice practitioners don't do, and that is, why does the harm keep happening? Right? Like, you can try to somehow redress past wrongs, but why does it keep happening? And what we then do is really look for root causes of harm and hold ourselves responsible as historians and as history keepers for trying to address that. So yeah, that's the Center for Restorative History. It's been such an amazing work, because I think how we work is really slow. It takes a long time to establish trust, and that you don't just leave a community after you've collected something. So to give you an example with that sign from Tallahatchie County, the shot up sign, we did end up collecting that historical marker, but the community decided how it was going to be interpreted in a national spot. They said, this is our precious object. We're not going to just give it to you. You need to tell our story to a national audience. That's the only reason we're allowing you to take it up to Washington, D.C. And then they said, and then you've got to come back here. And you need to uplift our work. And so that's what we've been doing over the past 3 or 4 years, is really finding out what people need and seeing how we can best meet that need. So these are really long and ongoing relationships, which most museums do not like, because it's time consuming. And also, if you engage in a relationship like that and people just say, you know what, this isn't right for us, you have to say, that's great, that's good. You know, we're here if you ever want us, but we're just gonna say that this project is not gonna come into fruition. So it's really challenging the way that museums work, where they really uplift work for themselves and not for the peoples whose history it actually is. Yeah.
What got you started in this work?
I should have an answer to that question by now. Well, if you go way, way back,
Repeat the question.
oh, sorry. The question was, how did I get into this work? I got into history because I had a lot of questions, and no one was answering my questions. So as a kid growing up, I was born in 1960, and everything just kept happening, and I would ask, like, why did Cassius Clay change his name? And there would be like this uncomfortable energy. And there were just so many questions, and I just felt like, wow, I'm walking around like just like half a person or something, because these questions aren't being answered. And then I studied history here, and then I was teaching. I taught in Mississippi for 17 years, and when my daughter entered the school system, I realized exactly where I was living. And so I started teaching teachers in the summertime. And there was one time where I was giving a talk about sites of slavery in Neshoba County. And when I finished the talk, the whole room like rose up, and I got a standing ovation, which has never happened to me. And I burst into tears, and it was not because of that I was saying something. It was that a person in my position was saying something that everybody already knew. And at that point, I was like, I'm not going to be a professor anymore. And so I just really devoted myself to public history. So I think I've always we just don't know the half of us. And the best thing about doing this kind of public history work is that you're working always alongside communities, which is something that's harder to do in other arenas, but you're in partnership. And then they've got to be ethical partnerships, which hasn't always happened.
When you're talking to communities and asking them what they need from you, is there a whole variety of things they need, and does the institution support you in meeting that need? Can you meet that need?
Excellent question. So people ask for all sorts of things, which I think is great, because our vision is so limited. So I really welcome the fact that there's a variety of different needs that people are expressing and what they want the institution to do. Then we have to be really upfront about our capacity, because generally we're about 3 people on a team. And we're also having to raise all of our own money. But then we go back to the institution and we're the advocate. And that's when we just start chipping away and trying to change policies. So I've spent more time with the Smithsonian lawyers sometimes than communities, trying to change the way that objects legally belong to one person or another. So it just turns into this hard policy work. But you have to be just really honest about what you can do and who you are. And often people will be disappointed, and then that's okay, because you have to let people know exactly what you're capable of.
Is that disappointment hard for you to see that disappointment reflected back if you're trying to change the institution?
Well, I'm still trying to change the institution, but if someone's just that's just not enough, I agree, it's not enough. It's not enough. We need to do this more seriously. Yeah. And the center, by the way, is closing.
Oh.
But we've got all the practices down. So we're just trying to make sure to secure the knowledge. Yeah.
You said there was a connection between Oberlin and Selma?
Yeah, and I'm not gonna remember this person's name, but who is the President King? Who else lived in that house? His name began with a B. Burrell. So apparently, during Reconstruction, he sent lots of funds down to Selma, Alabama, to help build freedmen's schools. And I was really thinking of that because I had just met Philip Howard, and he's in Selma, and he's also interested in abolitionist networks. And I was like, maybe there could be an Oberlin-Selma connection, and that maybe something could. Also, they just purchased a building that was the Freedmen's Bureau in Selma.
Although, again, having visited Selma in the relatively recent past, and seeing how long we've been struggling with their National Park Service grant,
Yeah.
I don't know, it just, Gary and I felt, we felt for them.
All of this work. When I was down in Tallahatchie County last week, somebody was saying, it's been, that work in Tallahatchie County has been going on since the 90s. And I have to share this one story that's just so amazing. The reason that that group formed in Tallahatchie County was because Jerome G. Little grew up in Tallahatchie County, and it wasn't until he enlisted in the military and went to war that he ever heard about Emmett Till. And then he came back home, and it was the 70s, and he was fighting to get decent water to his neighborhood, and then he was working on like fair housing. And he realized that he was going to have to hold public office, that the only way to get anything done was to hold public office. And so he had to sue Tallahatchie County 3 times, and it took all the way up until the 1990s, where he then won elected office. And his platform was education, housing, water, and Black history. He made Black history part of his political platform. And like I said, that's actually not something that's unusual. That's like a much longer tradition that we just don't tell that much. But part of his effort was then forming this group, and they were the ones who were eventually able to erect those markers. And they also got an apology from Tallahatchie County to Mimi Till and her family, and now that's a national park, which is closed down.
I was just curious, I'm very much interested in oral histories. What's your take on the importance or unimportance or difficulties of oral history?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. We do have 2 large oral history projects that are part of this. So one is with undocumented organizers. When I first came over to American history, I suddenly found myself dealing with the 20th and 21st century, and I'm really much more comfortable in the 19th. But one thing with doing slavery and freedom is that you very rarely have the first person voice. So like with Sojourner Truth, we don't have her direct words. And with so many others, we don't have her direct words. And I was seeing a similar people's movement, people without citizenship, people without the right to vote, who were changing the government, forcing the government's hand. And I thought, well, this time, why don't we actually make sure that we have their political philosophies and perspectives and life stories? And so that's been a 5-year project of collecting oral histories. And it's done really slowly with this particular method, where people really control the stories. And even when the oral history is done, there's lots of time to go back and forth. They control the indexing, we do redact. And we do have a guide that we wrote up about that, an oral history toolkit, which unfortunately, because of the current climate, we don't have up online right now. But I can share a physical copy, but people are in danger. But we worked with 5 different, we worked in LA, Chicago, Nebraska, North Carolina, DC, and Mexico City. Yes.
On that list, what was the location in Nebraska?
The question was, what was the location in Nebraska? We started in Omaha, and then quickly everyone said you have to go to Grand Island. And then the next thing we knew, we were out in Lexington. So we collected, like on the eastern side of Nebraska and in the mid-state, and then a little bit more over to the west.
Why Nebraska?
Oh, why Nebraska? Because the border is everywhere. And we really wanted people to know the border is everywhere. There is immigration detention everywhere. There's ICE everywhere. And people at that point in time were just thinking of the border. And we knew that we had North Carolina as kind of a rural state with a really strong activist tradition coming out of the Black community. And so we wanted to find some place that was unexpected, but also equally rural, so we could see how organizing takes place there.
So, an African-American friend of mine discovered recently when he was traveling to his family home, ancestral home in Georgia, that many of his ancestors were indigenous people. So is your history delved into indigenous people and the interrelationship with African-American history?
We don't have a project right now that's that, but over the past 2 years, we've been working with the National Museum of the American Indian because their work is very similar to ours. So the work that we've done has been done at the Anacostia Community Museum, at the Smithsonian's Folklife Center, and also at American Indian. So we're trying to network across the institution. But it's not comprehensive. What we've been able to do is not comprehensive.
Yeah, but I think it's an interesting thing about how they intermarried and the communities engaged with each other, and
Yeah,
that's part of each of their histories, and we don't have a lot of that understanding. I think that'll be an interesting thing to explore.
I do have a really great book suggestion for that. So it's Taya Miles, and it's a book that's called Ties That Bind.
Ties that bind.
Ties That Bind. And when I read that book, like sometimes you read something and I just wrote a fan letter because it's such a beautiful book and really well written. But it is Taya, T-I-Y-A, and then Miles, M-I-L-E-S. She's written other really great books too.
Do you want to say a few things about, a few more things about how to protect what we have in these difficult times? What are you doing at the Smithsonian? You would say download and archive, but where?
Right. So the question is, what are we doing to preserve things at the Smithsonian? We are downloading, and we're actually putting them onto hard drives, our work onto hard drives. And with some of the work that's really sensitive and involves other people and other people's lives, we're actually doing it on separate servers. So we bring our hotspots into work, and we only work off of those hotspots. But the other thing is really going through like all of the files, which is something I just had never done. Like honestly, I've been doing this since January and it's exhausting. But just to make sure that it's in like archival order so that people will be able to access it in the future. And so some of it, if it's not involving like people who could be in danger, that'll be sent to the Smithsonian Institution archives, but we're also downloading it just in case something happens. Yeah.
Exhausting.
It's exhausting work. But the other thing is that the objects, I think, are things that people don't think about. People kind of dismiss objects. So I'm being really careful about cataloging and embedding history into the object record. So a lot of my work now is really putting all of these histories in places that people wouldn't look, but that anyone researching the object in the future will definitely go into that file and have places to go.
I think,
I had a question on, just so if or have to close it, you cannot find any type of federal funding, different funding to try to keep it open?
Oh, for the Center for Restorative History?
Yeah.
The Center for Restorative History was always seen as like, it's something that our director has supported, but not supported financially. So, we've raised most of that money on our own. And at a certain point, people want to see matching funds from your institution. And so that's essentially what happened there. So while I think like the ideas and some of the products that come out of the center are things that the institution wants to hold up and elevate, what it actually takes to do the work is not something that they're supportive of. And it also is, while a lot of people are supportive and really intrigued and like to work with us, because one thing we always do when we work with somebody is like, you know what, how have you always wanted to do this? You know, like, if you could do it any way you wanted to, how would you do it? And then we have a lot of fun, but then it kind of upsets the structures of the institution.
I want to go back a bit to Carol's question. Your work, of course, is a history of a past. I'm also interested in how folks, curatorial folks, other folks within the museum and the museum world are making a history of the present that will be as well archived, that can be used in the form of truth commissions, that can be guarded and safeguarded. And I'm wondering whether there are sort of official ways in which you don't just leave it to journalists, but you inside the institutions are writing your own present histories.
That's definitely taking place. And that's taking place in every government agency. So people are really taking notes. People have all sorts of academic training and are really documenting. And I'm in the Division of Political History, so it's incumbent upon us to collect what's going on now. That's just part of our mission. But also this happened in the past, and there are these curators from back in the day that everyone was always like, oh, that person, I can't believe they're sneaking objects into the collection. And I'm like, oh, they're sneaking objects. So that, you know, we have a beautiful collection from the Poor People's Campaign that the museum wouldn't accession, but somebody just kept it in their office. But one thing I want to say, I've really been thinking about this and I don't have any answers for it, but I do think that we can see that institutions are under attack, but also kind of complicit in what's going on. So you can see that with universities, and you can see it some with the museums and other places. And I really have been turning back to like where we can do this on our own outside of those formal networks. And these are some community archives who are really very sophisticated in being able to do this work, and they're doing it independently. And I keep wishing that we could network, you know, that it's okay to say that everything needs to go local because we've always been able to preserve and really create locally, but it'd be really great if we could create a network. And then I look back to Carter G. Woodson and what he was doing by creating the possibilities for those networks too. But I think that's where our energy needs to go. And the other thing I'm also like, you know, people are gonna be bereft of any place where they can go and see these histories, but we can create our own platforms for them. And people are doing that. But it would be great if it was, yeah, every time I say that, everyone looks really tired. But I'm like, come on, we can do it, let's do it. So if anyone's interested, I don't know how we'll do it, but it's like Gloria, don't ask how, you just do it.
Well, I'm sure you'll take some more questions, and I want to just say to this audience, thank you very much. Sign up, take a sticker, give us some feedback on the talk. And Nancy, you're in a room that supports local history and telling the full story. So,
Yeah.
You know, thank you for coming and sharing with us. It's really lovely.
Such an honor. I was really nervous because this is your history and what do I know about it? So I just, yeah, it's really an honor. And I can't believe the amount of work that you've done. and really across generations, I can see it.
So we'll mill around for a while after, thank you so much. Okay. And I think we actually broadcast it, and
All right, good.
I think we did the whole thing.
Just the beginning, you have a little crowd, you have something.
Yeah, yeah.